The cry for help, the crystal spires of Ethos, caught the morning light like prisms, scattering rainbows across the floating gardens that drifted peacefully through the planet's atmosphere. For 3,000 years, Zephyrians had lived in perfect harmony with their world, their crystalline forms resonating with the natural frequencies that kept their cities aloft and their people content. They had never known war, never built weapons, never even conceived of the need for military force. Elder Crystalline Vex stood at the peak of the central resonance tower, her translucent blue form humming with gentle energy as she communed with the planetary consciousness. The morning ritual had been the same for centuries, a peaceful meditation that helped maintain the delicate balance of their world. But today, something was wrong. The harmony was broken by a discordant note that made her crystalline structure vibrate with alarmed ships, hundreds of them, dropping out of hyperspace with the brutal efficiency of predators descending on prey. They were angular, dark vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and they moved with a precision that spoke of military discipline. The Zephyrians had no experience with warships, but even they could recognize the intent behind such a formation. The Drakari Empire had arrived. Within hours, the first bombardment began. Not the gentle pulses of energy that Zephyrians used to shape their world, but vicious lances of plasma that tore through crystal spires and shattered the floating gardens. The attackers were methodical, targeting the resonance nodes that kept the city stable, sending entire districts crashing to the surface below. Millions of Zephyrians, beings who had never known violence, found themselves running for their lives as their world burned around them. Commander Threx of the Drakari 5th Conquest Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the destruction with cold satisfaction. His reptilian features showed no emotion as city after city fell before his guns. The Zephyrians were exactly what the intelligence reports had promised, a species rich in exotic crystals and energy technology, but completely defenseless. They would make excellent slaves for the Empire's mining operations, and their world would become another jewel in the Drakari crown. Resistance level? He asked his tactical officer, though he already knew the answer. Non-existent, Commander. They have no weapons, no shields, no military infrastructure of any kind. Some are broadcasting surrender messages in over 40 languages. Threx's scaled lips curled into what might have been a smile. Ignore them. Continue the bombardment until they stop running. Broken slaves are more obedient slaves. In the depths of the central resonance tower, Elder Vex struggled to maintain her composure as the building shook under enemy fire. Around her, the other elders were in various states of panic, their crystalline forms flickering with distress patterns. They had tried to communicate with the invaders, offering gifts of crystal and energy, but the attackers had responded only with more violence. "What do we do?" asked Elder Zephyr, his normally calm voice cracking with fear. "We have no warriors, no weapons. We don't even understand how to fight." Vex closed her eyes and let her consciousness expand, feeling the pain of her people across the planet. Millions were already dead or captured, and more were falling by the hour. In her long life, she had never felt such helplessness. But as she reached out further, beyond their world and into the cosmos, she sensed something else. Other civilizations, other species, some of which might be willing to help if they only knew what was happening. "We send a message," she said, her voice growing stronger with resolve. "We tell the galaxy what is happening here, and we ask for help. But who would answer?" Zephyr asked. "We have no allies, no trade agreements, nothing to offer in return." "Then we ask anyway," Vex replied. "If there is even one species out there that values life over profit, that believes in protecting the innocent, then we must try." The emergency broadcast array took precious minutes to activate, time they didn't have as Drakari dropships began landing in the city below. But finally, The transmission was ready, and Vex poured all of her desperation and hope into the message. That would race across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. To any who can hear this message, we are the Zephyrians of Ethos. We are a peaceful people who have never known war, and we are under attack by a force called the Drukhari Empire. Our cities are burning, our people are dying, and we have no way to defend ourselves. We have nothing to offer except our gratitude. But if there is anyone out there who believes that innocence deserves protection, please help us. We are running out of time. The message repeated automatically as Vex and the other elders evacuated the tower, joining the streams of refugees fleeing toward the planet's polar regions. Behind them, the crystal spires that had stood for millennia crumbled under the weight of alien weapons, and the harmony that had defined their civilization for 3,000 years was replaced by the screams of the dying and the laughter of Vav. Their conquerors. Across the galaxy, the message was received by thousands of listening posts and communication arrays. Most ignored it entirely, recognizing that the Zephyrians had nothing to offer in return for military assistance. Others filed it away as another tragic example of the strong preying on the weak, a common occurrence in a universe where might made right. A few more charitable species sent messages of sympathy and offers of refugee assistance, but none offered to actually fight. The message might have died there, lost among the countless other pleas for help that echoed through space. Every day, if it hadn't been picked up by Deep Space Monitoring Station Hermes, orbiting Neptune in the Sol system. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos was reviewing the overnight communications log when the Zephyrian transmission caught her attention. Unlike most of her colleagues in other star systems, Santos had grown up on the stories of humanity's early expansion, when small colonies had been saved by the timely intervention of Earth's fleets. "Sir, you need to see this," she called to her commanding officer, Captain James Morrison. Morrison read the transcript with a frown, then played the audio recording. The desperation in Elder Vex's voice was unmistakable, even translated through the universal communication protocols. When it finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Any response from the other major powers?" he asked. "Nothing substantive, sir. The Galactic Council has issued a statement expressing concern, but no offers of military aid. The other species are treating it as an internal matter." Morrison nodded grimly. He had served in the Terran Navy for 20 years, including tours during the Proxima conflicts and the Tau Ceti crisis. He understood the cold calculus of interstellar politics, but he also understood something else that many of his alien counterparts didn't. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the human thing to do. "Get me Admiral Chun at Fleet Command," he ordered. Priority Alpha communication. Admiral Sarah Chun was reviewing fleet deployment schedules when the communication came through. She knew Morrison well, a solid officer who didn't waste time on trivial matters. When she saw the priority rating, she cleared her schedule and took the call immediately. Asterisk, Captain Morrison, what's the situation? "Ma'am, we've received a distress call from the species called the Zephyrians. They're under attack by something called the Drukhari Empire, and from the sound of it, they're being massacred. No one else is responding to their plea for help." Chan's expression darkened as she reviewed the intelligence data that Morrison transmitted. The Zephyrians were indeed defenseless, a crystalline species that had never developed military technology. The Drukhari, on the other hand, were a known quantity in the intelligence files, a conquering empire that specialized in enslaving weaker species. "Estimated Drukhari force strength?" she asked. "Approximately 200 ships, mostly cruiser and destroyer class. Standard conquest formation. They're not expecting resistance." Chun was quiet for a moment, weighing the strategic implications. Earth had no formal alliance with the Zephyrians, no trade agreements, no mutual defense pacts. By the strict rules of interstellar law, this was none of humanity's business. But Admiral Chun hadn't risen to her current position by following the strict rules when innocent lives were at stake. Captain Morrison, I want you to compile everything we have on Zephyrian culture and Drakari military capabilities. I'm calling an emergency session of the Defense Council. 2 hours later, in the secure conference room beneath the Pacific Fleet. Headquarters, the most powerful military officers in human space, gathered around a holographic display showing the Ethos system. The debate was brief and one-sided. We have no strategic interest in this system, argued General Harris from the Army. It's 60 light years from our nearest outpost. The Zephyrians have no military value as allies, added Admiral Reeves from the home fleet. They can't even defend themselves. Chun listened to the objections with growing impatience. Finally, she stood and activated the recording of Elder Vex's message. The room fell silent as the desperate plea filled the air, and when it ended, Chun's voice was steady but firm. Gentlemen, ladies, we didn't become the strongest military power in known space by making decisions based solely on strategic value. We got here because when the innocent are threatened, we don't ask what's in it for us. We ask how fast we can get there. She gestured to the display, where the estimated casualties from the Drakari attack continued to climb. Right now, while we debate, millions of beings who have never hurt anyone are dying. Their only crime was being peaceful in a universe that mistakes gentleness for weakness. If we do nothing, if we let this happen because it's not our problem, then what does that make us? The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Admiral Reeves cleared his throat. What are you proposing, Sarah? Chun's smile was cold and predatory. I'm proposing we remind the galaxy why they call us Deathworlders. I'm proposing we show the Drakari what happens when they pick on someone under human protection. I'm proposing we send the entire Third Fleet to Ethos, along with the 5th and 7th Expeditionary Forces. General Harris leaned forward. That's almost a third of our active fleet strength. Yes, it is, Chun replied. And when we're done, every would-be conqueror in the galaxy will think twice before attacking a defenseless world, because they'll know that somewhere out there, there's a species that doesn't ignore distress calls. The vote was unanimous. Asterisk the Armada arrives. The hyperspace exit signatures were detected by Drakari sensors 12 hours before the human fleet arrived, but Commander Threx wasn't concerned. He had dealt with relief expeditions before, usually small flotillas of humanitarian vessels escorted by a handful of outdated warships. The standard procedure was to destroy the escorts and capture the relief ships for additional slaves. Emergence patterns suggest approximately 200 vessels, reported his sensor officer. Mixed configuration, unknown signatures. Threx nodded absently, more focused on the reports from the planetary surface. The Zephyrian population centers had been successfully reduced, with over 70% of the population now in custody or dead. The remaining holdouts were scattered across the polar regions, where the cold would do most of his work for him. In another few days, the conquest would be complete. Sir, the relief fleet is dropping out of hyperspace. On screen, Threx ordered, expecting to see the familiar configuration of a galactic council peacekeeping force or perhaps a coalition of merchant vessels. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, a wall of steel and firepower that stretched across the sensor display like a promise of violence. At its heart was the dreadnought TNS Indomitable, its 2-kilometer hull bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Flanking it were heavy cruisers and battleships, their angular designs speaking of a species that had learned to wage war in the harshest environment imaginable. And surrounding them all were clouds of smaller vessels, destroyers and frigates and assault carriers, more ships than Threx had ever seen in one place. 237 vessels, whispered his sensor officer, his voice tight with Fear. Reading massive energy signatures, military-grade shielding, and weapons configurations I've never seen before. Threx forced himself to remain calm. Numbers weren't everything in space combat. His ships were tried and tested, veterans of dozens of conquests. These newcomers, whoever they were, would learn the price of interfering with the Drakari Empire. All units, battle stations, prepare to engage the relief fleet. But before he could give the order to attack, his communications officer looked up with confusion. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. Audio only. Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was calm, professional, and utterly without compromise. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Navy, commanding the Third Fleet. You are in violation of interstellar law regarding the protection of non-combatant populations. You will immediately cease all hostile actions against the Zephyrian people and withdraw from this system. You have 5 minutes to comply." Threx's laugh was harsh and mocking. "This is Commander Threx of the Drakari 5th Conquest Fleet. This system is now property of the Drakari Empire. I suggest you withdraw before you share the fate of the Zephyrians." There was a pause, and when the human admiral spoke again, her voice had changed. It was still calm, still professional, but now it carried an edge that made Threx's scales crawl. "Commander Threx, you just made a very serious mistake. The Zephyrians are now under the protection of the Terran Republic. Your 5 minutes just became 5 seconds. The first human missiles began launching before Threx could react, streams of fire that crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds. But these weren't the crude kinetic projectiles or energy bolts that he was used to facing. These were intelligent weapons, guided by targeting systems that could track a single ship through a fleet formation and penetrate any known defensive system. The Drakari formation began to disintegrate as ship after ship was struck by weapons that seemed to anticipate their evasive maneuvers. Threx watched in horror as his heavy cruiser Ravager simply vanished in a ball of plasma, its shields and armor proving useless against whatever the humans had fired at it. "Return fire!" He screamed, but his weapons officers were already working frantically at their consoles. "Sir, their ships are too fast. They're using some kind of drive system that's interfering with our targeting computers." Indeed, the human vessels were moving with an agility that defied their size, dancing between Drakari weapons fire like fighters rather than capital ships. Their return fire was precise and devastating, each shot placed with surgical accuracy, to disable rather than destroy. It was a message, Threx realized with growing terror. They were demonstrating that they could have killed his entire fleet in the opening volley if they had chosen to. Asterisk on the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Chun watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The Drakari were competent enough against helpless civilians, but they had never faced a foe that hit back. Her tactical officers were systematically dismantling their formation, targeting engines and weapon systems to leave the enemy ships helpless but intact. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender transmissions from 17 Drakari vessels," reported her communications officer. "Acknowledged. Signal the surrender vessels to maintain position and power down all weapons. Anyone who tries to run gets turned into scrap metal." She turned to her tactical display, where the planetary surface of Ethos was highlighted in red wherever Drakari ground forces were operating. "Status of the expeditionary forces? Dropships are launching now, ma'am. General Martinez reports. His forces will be on the ground in 12 minutes. Chun nodded. The space battle was essentially over, but the real work was just beginning. The Drakari had scattered ground forces across the planet, and there were millions of Zephyrian civilians who needed immediate rescue. The Terran dropships hit the atmosphere of Ethos like falling stars, their heat shields glowing white-hot, as they descended toward the largest concentration of Drakari ground forces. General Carlos Martinez stood in the lead assault transport, watching the tactical display as his forces prepared for combat. Unlike the space battle above, this would be close and personal, the kind of fighting that humans had perfected over millennia of conflict. Remember, the Zephyrians are civilians, he broadcast to his forces. Protect them at all costs. The Drokari are military combatants, but we take prisoners when possible. Make sure they understand that mercy is a gift, not a weakness. The first wave of dropships landed in the ruins of Ethos City, where Drokari forces had herded thousands of Zephyrian civilians into makeshift prison camps. The human soldiers who emerged from the smoking transports were unlike anything the Asti Drokari had ever faced. They moved with the fluid grace of predators, their powered armor allowing them to leap between buildings and shrug off weapons fire that would have killed any normal being. Sergeant First Class Rebecca Stone led her squad through the crystal ruins, following the signals from Zephyrian life signs. The Drokari had set up guard posts throughout the city, confident that their superior firepower would be enough to handle any rescue attempt. They were wrong. Contact, 200 meters, whispered her point man. Guard post with approximately 20 hostiles, unknown number of civilians. Stone studied the tactical display on her visor, noting the positions of both enemies and innocents. The Drokari were using the Zephyrians as human shields, counting on their attackers' unwillingness to risk civilian casualties. It was a tactic that worked against most species, but humans had been dealing with hostage situations for centuries. Wilson, Chun, take the high ground. Martinez, Torres, sweep left. On my mark, we take them fast and clean. The attack lasted 15 seconds. Stone's team moved like clockwork, using non-lethal weapons to incapacitate the Drokari guards while avoiding any risk to the Zephyrian prisoners. When the smoke cleared, 20 enemy soldiers were unconscious on the ground, and 300 Zephyrian civilians were free. Elder Vex was among the rescued prisoners, her crystalline form dimmed by exhaustion and trauma, but still intact. When she saw the human soldiers, her first instinct was fear, but something in their gentle handling of the wounded Zephyrians told her that these were not conquerors. You. You came, she whispered, her voice resonating with disbelief. You? Actually came. Stone removed her helmet, revealing a scarred but kind face. Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Stone of the Terran Republic Marine Corps. We received your message. Nobody fights alone on our watch. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out as human forces systematically dismantled the Drokari occupation. The invaders, who had been so confident in their superiority over the defenseless Zephyrians, found themselves completely outmatched by soldiers who had learned to fight on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Within 18 hours of the human fleet's arrival, the last Drokari resistance had been eliminated. Commander Threx found himself in a detention cell aboard the Indomitable, stripped of his command and facing war crimes charges. Around him, the remnants of his fleet sat under heavy guard, their dreams of conquest turned to ash. Admiral Chun stood on the observation deck of her flagship, looking down at the slowly healing world of Ethos. Terran engineering teams were already working to repair the damaged crystal cities, while medical corps personnel tended to the wounded. It would take years to fully restore what the Drokari had destroyed, but the Zephyrians would survive. Admiral, said her aide, approaching with a communications pad, we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Everyone wants to know why we intervened. Chun smiled grimly. Tell them the truth. Tell them that when someone asks Earth for help, we don't ask what's in it for us. We ask how many ships we need to send. In the weeks that followed, the Battle of Ethos became legend. The story spread through the galaxy like wildfire, told and retold until it grew larger than life. Some versions claimed that the humans had sent 1,000 ships, others that they had single-handedly defeated the entire Drakari Empire. But the core truth remained constant. When the innocent had called for help, the Deathworlders had answered with everything they had. The Zephyrians, for their part, never forgot what humanity had done for them. They became staunch allies of Earth, their unique crystal technology proving invaluable in the construction of new starships and space stations. More importantly, they became living proof that not all strength came from weapons and armor. Sometimes, the greatest strength was the willingness to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And throughout the galaxy, potential aggressors learned a new lesson. Attack the innocent, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the humans would be coming. Not with a few ships, not with a token force, but with everything they had. Because that's what Deathworlders do when someone asks for help. They send armadas,